No mai, haere mai, piki mai, kake mai. Welcome to 30 with Guyon Espiner. 30 minutes, one guest, no cuts. What we record is what you get. Well, he helped establish Māori television. He's been the spokesman for the Māori King and was once described as the most reviled politician in New Zealand. Tuku Morgan. He grew up in poverty in a household where te reo Māori was the first language. And he's fought for that language and culture as a journalist, a politician, a member of the Kingitanga and as chair of Waikato Tainui. Now he says that Māori face an existential battle for their rights, their culture, their language against a government which he claims is hostile to their interests. So let's start the clock. 30 minutes with Tuku Morgan. Kia ora, welcome to 30. Thanks very much for coming in. I wanted to start with an opinion piece that you wrote for the New Zealand Herald in late 2023, where you said that the government had rendered Māori an almost nullity and gone back to a time of a notion of colonial superiority. Do you stand by that claim?
Absolutely. There were achievements that have been won as a result of courage, of a determination by our forebears and those leaders before my time were able to fashion a pathway so that people like me and my grandchildren could enjoy reo Māori. The opportunity to do things for ourselves, by Māori, for Māori, kaupapa, by Māori, for Māori strategies, both socially, environmentally, all of those things will be rendered gone. And that's a major problem for our people. So we have a responsibility as the chair of Waikato Tainui. I have a responsibility to make sure that those things that were entrenched in our treaty settlement, including the preservation of our reo, the notion of holistic well-being for my people are promoted and are upheld by this government.
OK, let's pick up on reo Māori, because it's one you mentioned and it's possibly one of the more visible elements of this government strategy. Now they're saying, look, government departments should use English names, the bureaucrats should communicate more in English. Is that really going to have a big impact on what has been an upward trajectory of acceptance and of skill and adoption of reo Māori? In other words, how much impact on your language is this government strategy going to have?
I think it's the public narrative that they promote, and this notion that that our language is irrelevant and inappropriate in modern society. And what is clear here is that whether you're sitting in an Air New Zealand plane or you're watching television news, our reo is undeniable. And it is the manner in which the reo is spoken and used today is part of the transformational face of this country. The world has changed, and modern New Zealand society have embraced reo Māori. And what you have is a whole bunch of very ageing white male who continue to perpetuate this notion that actually reo Māori is a sidebar.
Well, some of these are brown males, to be fair.
Yes, and even Winston is a problem, and he's enunciated that. But the issue that we have is that for Māori, there is only one place where this language belongs, and that's here in this country. We can't go anywhere else. Our existence, hinges around our uniqueness as a people hinges around our reo, our culture. And so
I get that, and I get that importance. I guess I'm asking, to what extent can the government really influence this? You might not like what they're doing with government departments and saying that, the names should be reversed to English. But will that actually change the trajectory of the embracing of te reo Māori in Aotearoa?
I think part of the undeniable responsibility of the Crown is to be a good partner. and that partnership was enshrined in the Treaty of Waitangi, and we should be working together, not against each other.
So do you see this as a breach of that?
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. That's the reason why we've taken this issue to the High Court, because it is certainly a breach of our Raupatu settlement.
So you're saying it's a breach of the Tainui settlement?
Absolutely, undeniably so. And in fact, we're very confident that our case before the High Court will be successful, because of the fact that actually the Crown has walked away from its obligation to preserve, promote, and maintain our reo within my iwi by their actions and the narrative that they are sowing publicly.
Some of this is, I guess, in a political sense, drawing from the politicians on a backlash, largely from Pākehā, who got frustrated with people like me and others in the media using te reo Māori. Do you understand why that upsets people? Because obviously, to some degree, it does, doesn't it? So, some people get upset with te whataora or with a journalist or broadcaster using reo Māori. It upsets people. Do you understand that?
Yeah, look, I do understand, and I can accept that there are old white people around this country who have a problem with that. Why
do you think they do?
Well, because I think their minds have been fixated to a certain view of the world. They don't embrace change, and younger New Zealanders are far more accommodating in terms of encompassing a culture that belongs to this country, that is not only belongs to Māori, but actually belongs to every New Zealander. It's what makes this country unique and different to any other country in the world, because the culture is only found here. The issue that these Pākehā people who in a sense are deeply racist and unappreciative of our values, is that they will stay in that place for a long, long time. They are unbending, they are inflexible, and they're unwilling to face this inevitable browning of our societies, because, in 40, 50 years' time, 2/3 of this population will be brown. And so I say to New Zealanders around the country, the world is moving. Our young people are embracing transformational change. And transformational change, in their view, is to accept that actually Māori culture is a living culture, and it's a unique culture, and it can belong to every person in this country and can have the same meaning as it has for Māori.
And you grew up speaking te reo Māori as a first language. You're in a family steeped in the kingitanga, really. You then become a teacher and then enter the media, right? First as a reporter for Te Karere, and then you move into TV3. We're filming this at Whakata Māori television. You were something of a godfather for Māori television and helped the establishment of it. But it was a pretty tough ride, wasn't it? It took a court case.
It was a tough ride, but you see, these sort of transformational phases in Māori development will always be tough, because we are up against a view of the world, a Pākehā view of the world that is unbending and inflexible. And unless you get a judicial decision, these sorts of things don't happen.
And you did, didn't you? Yes, the Māori Council went right to the Privy Council in London, the top court in the land, which forced the Crown to actually say, we have to protect reo and tikanga, and so there's a place for Māori television. A lot of people may not realise that we are, in some sense, sitting here today at Whakata Māori because of that court case, right?
Yes, and that's the injustice of the situation then, and I'm pleased that actually a judicial finding gave rise to the opportunity to have Māori television in this country. Long overdue, but it's these battles are battles that our people have endured over generation upon generation.
And most of them through the courts.
Absolutely.
You're before the court now,
Absolutely.
the High Court, saying that the reo is under threat. So you're back there, right?
So even down to treaty settlements, and everything that has happened in a significant way to Māori has been for the most part, come as a result of legal action. And that's unfortunate, because what that says to us that there are people in the society who will continue to impede the progress of Māori, obstruct the progress of Māori, unless, of course, there's a judicial finding and it's in our favour.
We talked a little bit about the media there. We are in something of a media apocalypse at the moment.
Yeah.
What will that mean for Māori media and for Māori stories if we see, as we are, major broadcasters and to an extent other media entities collapsing?
Yeah. The fact that you have a commercial, an American giant sitting behind three says one thing, that
behind
Māori,
TV3.
Māori, yes, Māori exist in the margins anyway. So even mainstream television, we are virtually invisible, save for the fact that politicians like Winston and others make us relevant for whatever issue arises at that time. So our people will always be in the margins. The fact that they're going to get rid of three and there are changes at Television New Zealand means that actually our voice becomes much more smaller. We become inconspicuous and insignificant in the television world of news and current affairs. And that is a major problem for us, because without that, there is no debate. Without that, there is no, there is no accountability to the issues where actually Māori can have a say in whatever concern that appears on television.
As I said earlier, you were instrumental in helping establish Māori television, and we talked about the court case that led to that. But then things blew up for you, didn't they, in the early days of Aotearoa television network, ATN, and we had the scandal of your clothing coverage, and people still remember this, the famous $89 pair of underpants, the clothing expenditure that was spent. Was that a fair cop? What was that like, facing that venom, and what do you think it was motivated by?
The face of racism appears in all sorts of forms, and when I participated in the political, in mainstream politics, I went into Parliament. It was obvious that I became a very easy target for the then Helen Clark-led opposition. They were desperate to get power. Winston and our team said no, and we went with the Nats. And clearly, someone like me that was an easy target for them to have a crack at. And for me, that's the jagged edge of racism.
Well, yeah, and you spent $4,000 on clothes, which is roughly what the TV journalists, when I worked at TVNZ, spent on the clothing allowance.
I know.
So it was. I'm just wondering what your reflection is of this time. It's a long time ago now, but of the media coverage of that.
I mean, I've purchased suits, and I know some of my colleagues have purchased a single suit worth more than $4,000. I mean, the issue for me is not about the clothing. The issue for me was the intent and the latent and obvious racism that emerged as a result of me being targeted by the Labour Party.
Do you take any responsibility there? You didn't show a lot
No,
of...
absolutely not. Absolutely not.
Absolutely not.
There is no
really...
contrition at all.
No, there's not. You didn't show any humility then,
absolutely
and you're not showing it now.
And I don't intend to, because actually what I'm paid is my business. How I use my salary is my business. Good. No one else's business. So that,
well, there was some public money involved, though, wasn't there?
I know, but you're public. When you're working with TVNZ, you get paid public money.
Yes.
It's the same thing when I was a journalist with One Network News and then Three National News. Yeah. But in the end, the pay that you receive, whether it's publicly funded or whatever,
sure,
is your own business.
And we'll move on. But you're basically saying you're not sorry.
No, absolutely not.
No.
But what I am sorry was that I guess on reflection, even when I was cleared by the Serious Fraud Office, there was an 18-month investigation. Every receipt, every activity that I undertook then, when I was 18, was subject to an intense SFO investigation, cleared me of everything. There was no contrition on the part of the Labour Party. There was no apology at all. And so that's the reason why I want to say I don't intend, nor do I have any the regret about being apologetic for what I did. I did what I did because I believed that money was mine.
All right, that's clear.
Kia ora.
You were with New Zealand First then.
Yeah.
Is it the party, and you had all 6 Māori seats at that point. Is it now the party you recognise then? I mean, is the Winston Peters that you signed up with then, do you recognise the same politician? Is it a consistency?
I think Winston has changed. I think that at that time we had all of the Māori seats. We had strong Māori MPs who were confident, who were highly skilled, and who were articulate and understood the issues. And
now New Zealand First is behind a lot of the drives of the policies you don't like.
Yeah, absolutely. And but I still think that actually New Zealand is a small place, and there are opportunities even with the jagged edge of the New Zealand First Party and the utterances of Winston Peters. Māori have to make and take opportunities, even in the most desperate situations, because where we are right now is that we still are at the bottom of the social consequences in terms of unemployment, poor health, education underachievement. All of those things are not new to us. We're still at the bottom. And whatever Winston says, or any other politician, Māori or otherwise, we're still at the bottom.
And the problem seems to be that when you try to address those things, as successive governments have, we had Helen Clark called it closing the gaps, you have other governments doing their thing, that after a while it seems like Pākehā or the political resentment cuts in and the pendulum swings back. And I wonder, I mean, we call it, globally, there's this sort of anti-woke thing going on. Do you think you're caught in that people see this as some sort of virtue signalling or, woke behaviour, and then the pendulum swings back against you? Do you think you're caught up in that at the moment?
I think there's a bit of Trumpism here in this country. I think that politicians look abroad and pick that which they think might work, and as a result of that, we are just consequences of an experiment by all these people who've got some crazy ideas, and there's some crazy ideas out there in this right-leaning government. Notwithstanding the fact that actually when Labour was around, they had an opportunity to transform our people. They didn't take it.
In 2016, you went and hooked up with the Māori Party and became president of the Māori Party. They were wiped out in 2017. Now they're back in their own guise. But are you done with politics now?
I'm done with central politics. I'm done with but I do want to say, though, that the responsibility for our people, there is an opportunity that beckons our people to go from the Pākehā role back onto the Māori role. We will always be bystanders and a supporting act to the main party unless we jump out of the Pākehā role and back onto the Māori role, and as a result create more Māori seats. Because in my view, unless we have more than 10 members of Parliament, we will, from time to time, might feature in a coalition government. But unless our people get serious about politics and make the jump and go back onto the Māori role, thus creating more Māori seats, we will always be spectators to the political process. And that's after years of being involved in both iwi politics and central politics, that's certainly my observation. We have a window of opportunity here. And I think that as I look at the last election and the results, there is an emergence of young Māori who are much more articulate, much more visionary about where they want to go. And so as a result of that, there was a landslide victory in the Māori seats. And I think that actually that augurs well for our people. I think what we need to do is we need to use all forums of the media, including social media, to try and say to our people, actually, if we want to participate and become real And if we want to make real change, we have to be involved in a much more significant way in the political process. We need more people in Parliament.
Okay. Let's talk about the kingitanga. And you were the mangai, or spokesman for the king for some time. You fell out with him over the credibility of the kingitanga. Now, a lot of this was to do with...
There wasn't a credibility of the kingitanga. It was the actions of one person.
Yes, and there were court cases and convictions,
Yes.
and so
Yes.
there was a fraud case against the private secretary for the king. So, but have you made up with King Tuheitia now?
Look,
How is that relationship?
I'm a staunch supporter of King Tuheitia. My support for him will never waver. I was raised in Kingitanga, and I will go to my deathbed still 100% committed to Kingitanga. Okay. The king and I are good.
The king and you're good with the king. Okay, good to establish that. Look, this goes back to the 1850s. I think first Māori king was 1858. You had Pacific, mid-19th century Pacific monarchies, didn't you? In Tahiti, Hawaii, Tonga, for example. So you had the kingitanga in the late 1850s. What is the relevance of the kingitanga today?
The force of unification. What is clear from the kingitanga hui that he called at Turanga Wāwai.
In January?
In January, more than 10,000 people turned up because of an earnest desire to rally. And the strength of the kingitanga is about unity, is about pulling our people together so that we can have a significant conversation about concerns that face our people. That was one of the major purposes and the reason why kingitanga was formed in 1858. Stop the sale of the land to the parea and unite our people so that we had a voice of unity. And I still believe, actually, that's where we are. And the fact that the subsequent hui at Ratana, then at Waitangi, tells me that actually the relevance and the appropriateness of the kingitanga is still strong.
So we had the Hui a Motu in January of 2024, but has it run out of steam now? No.
These things, kingitanga has been around since 1858.
Sure, but what I'm talking about is the opposition to the policies we talked about, with the dials being turned back on reo Māori, the Treaty Principles Bill, which we'll talk about in the last 10 minutes or so. But those pieces of government policy which you feel are suppressing Māori, has the kingitanga got a voice that will resonate and change and motivate Māori to stand up against that?
I think so. In fact, I'm confident that it can be, because there are young voices peppered amongst the old ones. There's a much better approach to the narrative, and I am confident that as we progress to the hui Āmotu in Gisborne, in Hastings, and then down to Christchurch, I am absolutely confident that the momentum will still be there, that the urgency, the sense of urgency and concern around government policies is still there.
Okay, let's talk about some of them. ACT wants to rewrite the Treaty Principles Bill.
Absolute nonsense.
The principles is established by judges, politicians, lawyers, etc., are basically partnership, participation and protection. Now, David Seymour, the ACT leader, says he wants to give the public a say. What is wrong with that in your view?
Yeah, well, he can... Look, the document is about a partnership. The treaty is about partnerships, all right? Māori and the Crown. Simple as that. You can't give the same rights to an immigrant to this country that has been long entrenched, not only in law but in our history since 1840. So while Seymour tries to...
Let's unpack that for a second.
Sure.
Sorry, because you drifted off, but what I heard was you can't give the same rights to an immigrant to New Zealand as opposed to someone who's Indigenous to New Zealand. Is that what you're saying?
No, because what Seymour was saying is that actually every other New Zealander has the same rights as Māori.
Yes, he's
that's a nonsense. And that's a nonsense.
So what are you saying, that other New Zealanders don't have the same rights as Māori?
Under the treaty, in terms of our rights to whenua, to the taiao, to the environment, all of those things that are safeguarded in the treaty are things that belong to Māori and to the Crown.
So, and he directly challenges that, doesn't he? Because under his rewrite, the government would have the right to govern all New Zealanders, probably not controversial, but he goes on to say that the government would honour all New Zealanders in chieftainship of land and property. New Zealanders would all be equal under the law and have the same rights and duties.
But that's there anyway. You know, that's there in the current statute as you know, here and now. What he's trying to do is to manipulate a historic agreement so that actually it's shared on the same basis as that which was promised to Māori.
So what would be the impact if he was successful? He probably won't be, because National said he's not going to support it. Yeah, but what would the impact be, do you think, if this did go to a referendum?
Yeah, I think that you will see action in this country, protest in this country, opposition in this country, never seen in the history of this country before. I think that there are those of us who you know, will not be, that we will not sit still and remain idle. That when you got this sort of nonsense.
So are you promising / warning of this regardless, or when this bill comes up for discussion?
If this bill is passed, and it goes beyond the first reading, they'll be held to play. Simple as that. They'll be held to play. It's an attack on an agreement that was enshrined in a trusting way by those rangatira in 1840. And yet you've got a political idiot here who is trying to modernise a document that actually will make 1840 a nullity.
A lot of the controversy about this subject comes from this idea of co-governance, and Labor got very tied up in that. What does co-governance mean to you?
Partnership. We've had partnership.
Here's the thing,
on the Waikato River,
sure,
since 2010. Yeah. 2010 has been in existence under what we call the Waikato River Authority, where there are equal number of iwi and equal number of Crown representatives, and it's worked well.
How far should that go? Because some people look at this as a maths equation and go, well, 17% of the population Māori roughly, yet should there be 50-50 representation on some issues?
Here's the problem.
How far does that go for you?
Yeah, well, here's the problem that we have in terms of history. In our iwi, 1.3 million acres were taken, rendering our iwi landless. Is there any is there any justice to that? Built on the back of that disposition of the theft of our lands, is that in our region here and now, nearly 30% of this country's GDP comes out of Mairohe. 75% of the water that comes into Auckland comes out of the Waikato and its associated the water bodies. And yet Waikato Tainu has been a mere spectator as successive councils and government have degraded the river to the extent that the river itself is a degraded body of water where we can't even take food or swim in it, safe from Ngaruawai all the way down to the port. Now you talk about justice, you talk about this 15% of the total population is absolute nonsense. I'm talking about justice here, and the injustice, the jagged edge of injustice has treated my people badly. And we've been on the wrong side of history, and so when we cut deals and we are smart enough to get these negotiations around co-governance and partnership, we should actually be applauded for taking a much more innovative approach, because in the last 100 years, we've watched councils degrade our water.
All right. You've called this our rangiriri moment, a time for us to defend our very existence. Justify that statement.
Absolutely. And as I say to you, our history has treated Maiiwi horrifically. We've been the casualties of the sea. I mean, just
a minute to go. So we are what we say on the tin. We're 30 minutes.
It is a rangiriri moment. We are fighting for our lives here.
Yeah,
we are fighting for our lives and the lives of those who are unborn.
And what shots have you got left to fire?
Lots of them. We're an iwi now who has economic power. We're nearly $2.4 billion of assets. We are capable of doing what we need to do to protect that which is our own and also protect the future of our young ones. Because in the end, it's the young ones who we serve.
Thank you very much for coming in. Really appreciate your time. That was 30 minutes with Tuku Morgan. This is 30 with me, Guyon Espiner. We'll catch you next time.